Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Artifact. I'm Alex, and this is my co-host.
Hello, I'm Justin.
We're two former creative writing majors searching. Hmm. We're two former creative. Shut up.
You can't silence me. What are you talking?
We're two. Shut up. We're two former creative writing majors searching for quality in a sea of movies. Every other week, we'll select a handful of films, the good, the bad, and the unimaginative, that we found particularly interesting, and discuss them. As always, our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution.
The show may contain explicit language or themes. See the show notes for specific content warnings.
Well, Justin, you know how this show works, as it always has. So let's talk about movies with good politics. Which one would you like to start with?
uh, I just want to point out that this is a general culture show, except for you don't read books anymore, so it had to become movies. But
I am knee deep in ethical and moral quandaries of the legal profession's casebook. So how dare you?
um. Anyway, yeah, we'll start talking about politics. The first one I have listed here is the Joker movie, which has probably already been talked to death, but we're gonna try and talk about these movies a little bit differently, and sort of give a rather than doing a deep dive into each one, sort of look at a few movies and sort of see what they're saying about the state of the world in 2020, in this case for politics. So, yeah, we both saw Joker. I think we both enjoyed Joker despite the uh, campaigns against it. Yeah, if anything, this movie is very on the nose with its politics. I mean, they hold up newspapers that say to kill the rich, which is probably why it got some of the negative press it got, but that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, you saw it first, and you were kind enough not to sort of spoil anything for me. And I remember as soon as I finished watching it, well after the theater release date, I texted you. Anybody that thinks this is about, sort of white male rage or incel culture, like championing it, is being willfully ignorant of the class overtones. Like you said, it's not subtle, not even undertones, just the class struggle issues and sort of call for challenging that and the way that especially the poor, but especially the um, handicapped and ill are mistreated by the current system. I remember that. I think I texted you that. I think before the credits were even finished rolling. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm in agreement with you as sort of like what to look for, what it's actually saying, and sort of why. And I think you're right as to why it got such a negative backlash that it did. Yeah, so I think anybody that says otherwise wasn't watching the movie or sort of brought too much of their own baggage to that. See, for whatever reason that they decided to put on the Joker as a general audience member, not necessarily as a critic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the reason why I put the Joker on this list for thinking about where we're at in 2020 now is, well, maybe not right now. We made this list pre-coronavirus, but the reason why I put Joker on here was because I really do feel like it speaks to the sort of decision we have between a candidate like Trump and a candidate like Bernie Sanders, in terms of you really see this, especially when Joker says, because I think part of the complaints about the movie was when Joker claims that he's not being political. Although I think an astute observer might notice that he's actually being very political, whether or not he realizes it. Um, but I think that sort of represents this sort of Trump mindset of not necessarily being fully aware of a larger ideological structure around a decision to, say, do something like building a border wall, but just having a general sense that um, there's some change that they want to see enacted, but going about it in perhaps not the most productive way, as I think we're supposed to take from the fact that they're kind of just lighting their city on fire at the end without necessarily a clear motive. I think there's a very clear class on they definitely want do blame rich people for their problems, but they don't have a clear outlet to sort of enact the change they want to see, and so it just ends up kind of becoming chaotic, or sort of as the Joker frames it, non-political, and that's sort of the what I see as sort of like the Trump mindset of nothing Trump is doing is like the right way to do anything, but I think the people who support Trump at least sort of realize that something is askew. So that's the one option we're presented with. It sort of presents like the nightmare scenario of, okay, you have all these people that are upset, and if you don't give them the proper outlet, this is what you're gonna end up with, which is what we basically have, is what we're leading to now.
I would agree, and I think I think we've talked about this before. So I think going back to the your soup episode about not being political and not understanding is like how much truly politics affects everything in your life, and who's in control of that. And so when the Joker says he's not being political, I think a lot of people also make that same mistake. Like you said, with not knowing sort of where to put the blame and just sort of thinking that, well, this is just an opinion. I'm not being political, but the ramifications behind pretty much every decision that people make. I mean, there's political consequences, if not to you, to somebody else. I mean, we sort of see how that manifests with all the people rioting. And, speaking of, the rioting and seeing how that happens, I think that might be a good transition to another movie about vast social inequality, the way the rich abuse the poor, and where the answer is deemed to be indeed rioting. Justin, what were your thoughts on Sorry to Bother You?
Okay, I'm glad you went to this one. I was like, he's either going to this one or Purge. I wasn't quite sure, but
So,
this
the
is.
Lego movie.
um, yeah. Okay. So, sorry to bother you. Pairs very well with Joker, and I actually think is a better movie than Joker, because we see of actually a very similar pattern that gets followed, except it's a little bit more. Um, the riots in the end are a little bit more focused. So obviously, there's spoilers for all the movies we're going to talk about.
I
I
was going to
guess.
give it a, a spoiler warning in our outro.
There'll be a list of movies spoiled in the show notes, but yeah. So obviously they're turning people, basically this Amazon like corporation is turning their employees into these half human, half horse hybrids, and but at the end of the movie we see them sort of rise up and fight back against their corporation, and and so we see a very similar scene of like rioting in the streets and chaos, but rather than the sort of leader figure declaring it as non-political because the people rioting don't have like a political consciousness, and this one they have a very clear sense of what their goals are, and they're sort of like the fact that they've been literally marked with these like uh, horse genes or whatever, however you want to consider the transformation, sort of speaks to their class consciousness, which they don't necessarily have in the same way as in Joker. And also, this movie is just much more attuned to the sort of racial politics that go into that as well, I think. But these movies together, I think, yeah, they definitely speak to one another.
Honestly, I don't know how wide of a release this movie got. I remember sort of seeing ads for it, and then I watched it streaming, I believe, on Hulu. But I remember watching and just thinking just how sort of refreshing and radical, and like I can't really believe that that's sort of how it ended, and they finally, they really went all out on it, and I think Boots Riley, the writer director, is an immense talent. And he's a good person to follow on social media and follow creatively in his career. But I think it's a testament to say that it's nice to see, because you like those types of movies can still get made, they can be successful, they can be well lauded. And I mean, I think the only lead actor who was white was Armie Hammer as the antagonist, the sort of evil corporate villain in that. So I mean, there's a lot of things that that you see successfully applied to this movie that a lot of people will say, you know, say is like, well, that makes it like a genre film, or that makes like, oh, it's a black movie, it's a whatever movie, things like that. But I think that Sorry to Bother You is successful in sort of all capacities, and I think what we see as an extreme, not we as an American culture would see sort of as an extreme ending is sort of presented as, the one true answer that we're, being forced into. And the logical conclusion that a lot of leftist ideologies eventually come to is sort of just like a matter of fact, like this is sort of the economic inevitability based on the current system. I think this is a good film to watch to sort of present that ideology to somebody that may be unfamiliar with it in a very entertaining and comedic way too. I mean, it's just a good, enjoyable movie as well as being, a real thinker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. Yeah, I think I'll just say too. I think it has a more nuanced take on sort of identity politics than I think might be at first apparent on the surface. Which, again, Joker doesn't necessarily have that as much, but I think it really tries to understand. It at one time sort of like takes down this sort of liberal centrist notion of how identity politics could work and sort of replaces it with a more practical version, which I think is useful.
And, talking about sort of inevitable violence when led to our current economic system to an extreme, but if you were to take it to perhaps the other side of the extreme and with a far less talented writing staff, you might get another movie of violence between classes, but maybe not going the way you'd like it to, and what Justin can only be seen as the hill he will die on, that The Purge is in fact a good movie past its thematic elements.
Okay. Now I feel like after this week, you have to agree that The Purge is a good movie.
This has been a long time coming, motherfucker.
And we waited till the perfect time in history to talk about it because we are living in it now.
Do your worst. Do your worst.
Okay, so this movie, the reason I like this movie, and I don't want to be overstated, this is not one of my all-time favorite movies or anything like that. But I think if you're going to watch a Halloween movie, you could definitely do a lot worse than Purge. Some of the scares are, it gets a little bit repetitive, and I'm talking about the original one. Or whatever. I know that there's like the First Purge is its own movie. That's like the fifth movie or something. I'm talking about the original one is the one I'm talking about. But yeah, some of the scares get repetitive. And they're not necessarily always effective, but they're there. They do their job. But the reason why this movie is why I will defend this movie is because very few Halloween movies or horror movies or whatever you want to call it have any sort of political message, but this one does. And again, like the other movies we've talked about so far, definitely focuses on this sort of class divide, as well as like Sorry to Bother You also includes the racial component as well, to focus in on that. Which again, like already right there, I could stop and say like, what other Halloween movies are doing that? But then I think also just kind of the execution of it, I think is kind of cool in terms of thinking about, okay, like what is the government doing? What are private businesses doing? And then also the sort of psychological thriller component of like what are individual people sort of doing in this. So it's like, is it necessarily like a great movie in terms of just like execution? Not always, no. But if you're gonna have a Halloween movie night, I think Purge needs to be on the list.
Here's what you get. One, it's under 90 minutes, so that's automatically a thumbs up for me. Fine. Secondly, yeah, anything that shits on rich people and shows sort of the innate depravity of the separation of class structure, fine. That's another point. You're lucky. Neither of us wrote notes for this session. That's not good. I don't know if that's getting cut. You're lucky because had I known that you were going to say, now we have to. Here's what's going to happen. Season 2 episode, we're going to do movies again, and I'm going to dunk on you with all of the political horror movies, which there are plenty of. Inherently, when you kill a bunch of people in a movie, who dies and who lives? Justin, have you learned nothing from our discussion of Joker? Everything's political. A minute ago, you don't listen to me. Everything's political, Justin. That's neither here nor there. I will season 2. I'm going to come back strong in 2.5 years, and you're going to remember. We're going to remember this whole conversation. I'm going to dunk on you, destroy you with the movies I picked that are political horror movies that have racial elements to it. Neither here nor there. My problem is okay, execute. Honestly, it is just execution. I will not concede. I will never give you an inch of the show ever. You could be right. That's not my priority at all. Yes, it's. You know what?
You got nothing.
No, I do. I have a. You put it in such a tight fucking corner. You know what? Fine, Justin. Yeah, if you're gonna watch a scary movie on Halloween, The Purge is a fine selection.
That's all I've ever said.
Oh my god! I'm making a goddamn mashup at the end of this fucking episode. I swear to God, get through all of our backlog bullshit. Oh, ooh, ooh.
I will be vindicated.
I will. Ooh, I will be vindicated. Maybe let's go for a lighter tone. We'll go. Everything's great. That's fuck. Is that the name of the song?
Everything is awesome.
Everything is awesome. Thank you, Justin. See, we can be collaborative when you decide to actually help me and not just say be facetious with your movie selection. All right, the Lego Movie.
Okay, the reason I put the Lego Movie on this list. Okay, first of all, just because it's an animated movie, I feel like it's this is not any kids can watch this movie, but it's not just a kids movie. It is like funny and mostly lighthearted and good, but at the core, it's really this, which is kind of surprising coming from the Lego Corporation, but it's really a movie about like anti-copyright. So I'm not even necessarily sure that this movie, it might not even fit as much in terms of like, is there anything specific about the moment we're in right now? I'm not. This could be a little bit more general, I guess, but yeah, I still just think it's a cool movie to talk about. Because yeah, it's really like this movie about like the villain is trying to like glue everything together so that it can't be moved or separated. Basically, it's just like you can't like create new things out of like these existing like Lego piece structures. And yeah, the movie's basically about like why actually no, that's a bad thing, and we need to let people be creative and sort of defy these corporations' attempts at patents. I guess the only way that does sort of fit in is the way that Disney is now buying up all these properties, and it's like hard to, it's becoming harder for other people to do stuff with them. Shout out to Sony for rescuing Spider-Man, but yeah, that's the reason I put the movie on the list. I feel like it's a little bit slept on.
If you had to pick between the Purge and Lego Movie, I mean, the execution of Lego Movie is just.
Yeah, the Lego movie's way better, but again, you're not watching Lego Movie on your Halloween movie marathon night.
Don't tell me what to watch in my Halloween movie marathon, you motherfucker. I'm easily scared. So I like watching non-scary movies for Halloween. So that's why Hereditary will be on my not-scary movie list. That's right, folks. We're transitioning to the state of movies in general and why these ones are bad. Hereditary's up first.
Okay, so this list is not necessarily just about why these movies are bad. It's about
It is for me.
These are movies that we felt like say something larger about the state of movies in general, and so it's not as much about saying like these particular movies are like the worst of the worst, but instead like thinking about stuff that's in them that speaks to other movies as well. So with Hereditary, and a lot of it too is sort of based on the reception of the movies. So with Hereditary, the reason it's on this list, I don't hate Hereditary. I just think it's.
Do you think it's a good movie, Justin?
I would not say it's a good movie.
Folks, granted, what Justin said is technically true. Do be aware that this is taking place. This is covering our safe room section of it. So, just be aware of what that means. That what the implications behind that is whether or not these are just us saying these are bad movies. Please, Justin, forgive my interruption.
Yeah. So it's interesting that Hereditary is the way that it's sort of portrayed to be a scary movie. And I think I can actually get more into this with some of the other. There's another scary movie on the list that I feel like fits into this, but
Just don't fuck with my transition.
there's there's not a lot of scares in the movie for supposedly scary movies. And I'm not saying like there need like movies that just carve use cheap jump scares aren't great either, but there's also not a lot of like creepy imagery or things like that. There's a few scenes that are either shocking or a little bit scary, but they're very few and far between. There's some atmospheric stuff that seems like it could lead to something scary, but just doesn't. And then you get to the end, and it kind of all falls apart. Yeah, so I guess the question is trying to think about like, why this movie was received as well as it was then.
So, I mean, my immediate theory, and I don't think I'm wrong, because I know I'm not. I rarely am. I think I just, for whatever reason, I think that this one seems to be like one of the first horror movies that a lot of people saw that was like super like highly like produced, like just has a really like a nice like look to it. Like they used a camera that you're not used to seeing in horror movies, or like they had like a higher acting caliber of the people that they had. They're like, oh, I recognize some of these people that you just like weren't used to. Like I'm not exactly, because there's like nothing. It doesn't seem to me that this film, ever having watched it, I mean, I watched it fairly recently, pretty late into Hereditary's life, but knowing how off the chain everybody was about this thing and like talking about it like relative to like Midsommar, which was Ari Aster's second feature film following this, like I don't, it's just like it's not really bringing anything new to the genre, and it's not even like doing anything in the genre particularly well. And I don't know, I think it's just like it's got a good sheen to it. Like I'm not sure, because I mean there's like occult horror is by nothing new. We can talk about why I'll talk about why it's bad in a little bit, but I guess I'd want to hear, Justin, why you think it was so well received.
I feel like one of the big scenes that everyone talks about in this movie is when the girl gets her head knocked off.
Classic.
And I think that, that scene was spoiled for me, so maybe it would have been a little bit more impactful. So I think there are like a few key moments that kind of jump in the movie. But I guess I think the best I can say, and maybe this in some ways is a weird defense of the movie, is that it is so not the cheap jump scare of something like Paranormal Activity or what The Nun is like part of what franchise is that?
Is that Annabelle
Conjuring
franchise?
or Annabelle?
Conjuring, yeah, you're right. Conjuring, yeah. But that also might be Annabelle. That might all be Conjuring. I don't know though.
Yeah, so it's not the cheap jump scares like Paranormal Activity or Conjuring or something like that. So I think it's in some ways maybe it's just refreshing for people to see this movie. But so yeah, I guess that's my only answer.
That's fair, but that's also a good transition to like one of my biggest critiques is just like the glacial pacing of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is to say, like, yeah, they don't have any jump scares, but like then nothing fucking happens. Like, it's just both, honestly, even like narratively, like it's so slow, and I don't like. There's the payoff is so immediate and so sort of just like, I don't know, just seemingly out of goddamn nowhere, and also kind of underwhelming. But I guess it's not a personal opinion. But even with like the pacing, like I don't even think like the setting was that eerie or that like sort of unsettling throughout. I think it was just sort of you're just sort of like, all right, well, like something's. I think because you're watching like this is technically a horror film, like you have the expectation that something's going to happen. So there's like an inherent sense of like dread, maybe, but like the film doesn't really create that much unease as far as I'm concerned. Like, yeah, there's some long takes around like slow corners, but they literally never pay off. And we could dunk on this movie. I could dunk on this movie till the fucking cows come home, but I'm not gonna waste. I'm never one to waste a good transition. And so, there's other movies also. I think from the same studio. I think they're both from A24, with films that don't have a lot going on scene to scene, very slow pace, not a lot of jump scares that just have this over. But I think the next one we'll talk about has a lot more sense of loose dread of where it's coming from, but I think that also has to do with a better setting choice. Even though they both take place in the woods, the well, I guess a house surrounded by the wilderness in some capacity. I think perhaps it's because it's the more antiquated timeline that I think that they are able to use sort of the idea of being fully surrounded by opaque woods to a far more successful degree. Justin.
You never actually said the name of the movie.
Justin, tell me about The Witch.
So that was speaking of glacial pacing, that was the
Yeah.
transition.
But okay, all right, relax.
Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to get the good stuff in up front. All right, I'm trying to be nice up front.
So yeah, The Witch is the other movie that pairs nicely with Hereditary in terms of, and perhaps even more so than Hereditary. It's a movie where nothing actually happens in the movie. There's a few scenes. The scene where you actually see the witch is a little bit scary, kind of more creepy than scary, I think. But and then the goat kills someone at some point, which is a little bit scary.
The goat murders the father and then becomes the goddamn devil. Justin, this is a better film. Don't act like this is the worst of the two films. Also, no. I'm not. I will not stand for this because you're gonna say, "Oh, when they see the witch, it's like creepy but kind of scary." When that little girl lost her head against the fucking pole, I laughed. Justin, you understand? That might say more about me than the film, but god damn it, that wasn't. It was. You're just like, there's no way because there wasn't like. I mean, I guess there wasn't supposed to be a buildup, but you just like, what? Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. At least with Hereditary, I kind of felt like I had a sense of why I was watching the movie. Like I'm like, okay, they're building up to, she's like looking for her mom or something. I don't even remember.
Oh, I'm sorry. What is that? What you were like? You don't remember? What the fuck are you talking about? I know what I was looking for. I think it was the mommy. I don't fucking.
Well, she's looking at the old photos, and then she sees like the ghost of her mom or whatever. Wasn't she like looking something like that?
You know why you were watching it when the third act reveal comes in, Justin?
No.
Fuck you.
In the beginning, you see. Anyway, it's not important. But in The Witch,
no, it's not. No, it's not.
In The Witch, I had no idea like why I was watching this. It was just like, oh, here's some random people in the woods who you can't even understand what they're saying half the time, but you can just watch them kind of walk around, and every now and then, like once every hour or so, something kind of scary might happen.
I'd invite you to rewatch it as a slice of life film, but if you live with the devil incarnate as a goat. Black Phillip is one of the most iconic characters of the 2010s. You can't tell me
different. But again, I think it's not a bad film. I actually gave them the same rating on my letterbox, but it's not a bad film. It's just interesting. And again, I guess I would say the same thing. Maybe it is the lack of jump scares. I think people do appreciate the atmosphere. I mean, I appreciate the atmosphere of it too. I just can't imagine going back and rewatching it. Like you said, if I rewatched it, it would be like a slice of life, which is fine, I guess, but it's not really. I don't even know if as a slice of life it's that interesting. Like which of the characters did you find interesting? Like,
the Black Phillip, dude, the goat. You just look at the goat. It's not the kid that fucks a 900-year-old witch and throws up an apple. It's not the dad who's British but kind of isn't. It's not. Honestly, I don't even know what the mom looks like. It's the daughter loses the baby. I think she's just sad. I mean, I guess the daughter, she just sort of like gets shit on and she didn't do anything. Well, actually, all right. I mean, that's the point. But I think we can do. I think there's a good feminist critique here about the way the female's treated. I mean, I'm not breaking ground here. I'm just saying this is a better film than Hereditary. For both these movies, it was the game was rigged from the start. And there's something to be said about that. But like, all right, we don't need to spend much more time on this.
Speaking of the game being rigged from the start, that's a good transition for Cabin in the Woods.
Ooh, yeah. All right. Okay. So the
I
final.
I don't remember anything about that movie, but
no, that's fully correct. Well, then why the fuck is it on the list, Justin? So you put it on here. You're right. Cabin in the Woods is the one where it's like they gotta fulfill the archetypal bullshit.
I do remember a little about the movie, but I think Cabin in the Woods is different than the Witch or Hereditary in sort of what it's trying to do, even though it's still ostensibly a horror movie, maybe question mark
satire that's still trying to be scary, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Cabin. Okay, so and this will make an easy transition to the next movie too. All right, already know, but
It's all
Kevin
you,
the
bud.
Kevin in the Woods is says something about sort of the state of satire. I guess it's a weird movie where it's like it's trying to be a satire, but it's not demonstrating that it actually has the potential to be good. It's just it's like a bad movie that's calling attention to the fact that it's bad. Where it'll be like it kind of like points out. I'll say if this movie came out like 30 years earlier, it might be would have been like groundbreaking and like interesting. But it's like making fun of like horror tropes from like the 80s while sort of just like repeating them, and then kind of just goes like weird at the end, including like one of the dumbest final shots of any horror movie except
Real
maybe
bad.
Krampus. But
Ooh,
have you seen Krampus?
I haven't seen Krampus.
I fell asleep watching it.
All right, well, that's to be fair though, Justin. Hereditary also has a terrible ending shot, just because you sort of fully appreciate that they never realized any of this really weird miniature like motif theme that they were going for. It never mattered. That's
Yeah, the
neither here
whole
nor there.
yeah, everyone's talked the ending of Hereditary to death, but it sucks. But this just in terms of like the ending of Kevin in the Woods is just like was it a fist just like comes up from the ground or like
The
crushes them or
giant
something?
like lava monster from the center of the earth that they like appease by like sacrificing everybody just comes and destroys the earth like out of
Yeah,
nowhere.
it's just like they had no way to end the movie, so they're just like,
No.
whatever. But yeah, it's just
Fuck it. The whole thing goes fucking boom. I don't give a shit.
But yeah, again, the reception of this movie, people treated it like there was like some comedic masterpiece or something. Where it's like, no, like these are the same jokes that people have been making for literal decades now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we should start pairing these with like better movies that like they're trying to be, but like instead of watching Cabin in the Woods, watch Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which actually has some class undertones to it as well. I don't know if you've seen that one, Justin, but
No.
that one's worth watching on your Halloween playlist. And I guess, well, I mean, if you're gonna watch Hereditary, just watch Midsummer instead.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what. I mean, that you can watch Midsummer instead of The Witch also, but we'll think
Just
better.
watch
Right.
Midsummer.
Just watch Midsummer.
So that could be a good movie it pairs with, but I think the not so good movie it pairs with is Deadpool 2,
Oh, do tell.
which seems to be doing
I'm cutting you off to tell me to talk more about it, Justin.
Which seems to be doing a similar thing. I will say I was a fan of the first Deadpool.
Mhm.
I don't. It's not necessarily like an all-time great movie, but it was very refreshing, especially in the midst of the sort of we're sort of at the height of the superhero craze. Then to see a movie
Mhm.
sort of take them down a little bit was nice. It seems like we're actually kind of out of the superhero craze for at least now, which is really refreshing. But, anyways, but then Deadpool 2 comes along and it does not do what Deadpool 1 did. So much like Kevin in the Woods, it also is like pointing out a lot of tropes of superhero movies, but just repeats them. So like they'll be in like one of the in the final fight scene or whatever, you know, because like superhero movies will always have like these two fights going on at the same time or however they do it, and they kind of just like comment on like, oh, like isn't that weird, like we're in like one of those cliche like final battle scenes, and it's like
Mhm.
you can point that out, but you're still doing it. So you can't
Right.
just because you're like, hey everyone, look, we know the movie we made is bad doesn't make the movie good, and that's like what Deadpool 2 is from beginning to end.
Mhm. Yeah, there's something to be said about tongue in cheek, but keeping the formula the same. Like it's not. I don't know. Like I mean, I think that's the harshest and most accurate critique you can give of that movie. I mean, I think even just I mean, it's successful. I mean, it's a successful franchise financially. I mean, critically, and I think both films are fairly enjoyable regardless. But even I think the idea of a sequel sort of immediately undercuts, the satire of it.
Hmm.
Not my take or anything, but like my relationship with Deadpool 2 was very much the same as my relationship with Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which I thought was a fine enough movie with some highlights. But a lot of the critiques that other people gave was like, well, it's just sort of more the same. And that's true, but I only seen both the original film once, and then I saw the second film. I was like, oh, cool. I like this the first time. But there's a difference between doing that as just a sequel and then as a satire sequel. So like you can enjoy it the same as an audience member, but sort of the message is trying to convey is severely undercut and sort of if you can't even satirize it properly, I think it's time to let it go. Fortunately, I think the superhero film, especially the Marvel series, is sort of in its death throes, hopefully. But like I think within the next year or two, we're gonna see the first one lose money. It'll be a good day.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that's what the sort of. I mean, I hope that's what the legacy of Deadpool 2 will be, if anyone even bothers to remember it. Is just that, like, that, to me, that Deadpool 2 really marks the sort of end of the superhero, like, the height of the superhero craze, where it's like, when even the movie that's supposed to be satiring these movies, like, can't manage to satire them because it itself is just like tired and unoriginal and uninspired, like then you really are running into an issue. It's like the first movie could satire them because it was like a new fresh take, but then it's like by the time you get to the second one, it's like, yeah, the movies still are doing the same exact things. There's nothing new to satire. Like the best we can do is just be like an uninspired satire of these uninspired movies. It's just like, yeah, if that's not the perfect like metaphor for that, we've reached the end of our steam here.
Speaking of uninspired comedies, we have the 2019 darling Olivia Wilde directorial debut, Booksmart, which isn't good. In case you were wondering, or if you haven't seen it yet, or if you have seen it yet, you think it's good. You're wrong, Justin. Why are they wrong?
Okay, so I mean, well, a lot of reasons. Booksmart is such a mess, and we don't really have time to get into it. I think or I mean, we don't have time to get into like every single issue with the movie, but I think overall, what's interesting about the movie is that it seemed like people really liked it because of the sort of representation in the movie. Like there is a lot of diversity in the movie, and the movie definitely does have its heart in the right place. I think it's interesting that people sort of allowed all of that to outweigh the fact that this story is one of the worst stories I've ever seen converted into a feature length film. Uh, yeah, I don't know if there's like specific moments you want to point to.
Well, they really tripled down even on the fact of a teacher-student relationship being a real vein of comedy they insist on keep on striking. And apparently it's okay and funny if the teacher's a female and the student's male, and also confirm that the student is of age consent, which like isn't really the issue with student-teacher relationships. It's one of the problems, kind of, but like they're never like, well, she was 17, so like, it's never okay. The teacher's like the champion in this film throughout. And so is the student's experience. So there's that. That's a good litmus test to see how much people are willing to die on that hill of like saying whether that's funny or not. If they're like, no, that's fine. That's when you know who you're talking to.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like this movie was written in like one draft and never edited. There's just like a lot of I mean, the fact that all of this stuff happens in one night. Like
Insane.
The movie's supposed to be like basically from them like getting out of school. I mean, I think it starts whatever, but it's like
It's the morning of the last day of school until the day after.
yeah, and it's just like they're like going on cruise ships. They're like going all around the city, hiring like Uber drivers to travel all around. It's like there's no way. And then they like somehow still make it to this party that starts at like 6 or something. It's like, yeah,
They trip on like a heavy dose of drugs and like we watched their
oh
whole
my god.
trip.
Also, that stupid scene where they turn to dust. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and we watched them work their way through an acid trip, and like in their time, it probably took less than an hour, and they were high. They were high enough to think that they both turned into goddamn Barbie dolls together. If you don't pay attention, the movie's better, I guess.
Yeah,
Nothing makes sense. There's so much slow mo to like no effect. The two leads are fine. They do a good job together. They're good actors, both. I'll give them that much. But like
but
movie
they have no
itself,
script.
they have no script. And like there's just a lot of things happen that just like that. Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know. Like, there's something to be said about like plot holes in movies and like being too concerned with them. But like, if you just pull on the thread a little bit, this whole thing comes apart.
Yeah, I think it's hard to really give a sense with just talking about how bad. Like, what you have to do is go to like watch the movie and then go look at reviews for it. That's really the only way to fully appreciate why this movie's on this list. So I think it's easy enough to see why the movie's bad, but when you look at people's reviews of it, I think is when it really sinks in. Like something is deeply wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I think it's like I think you opened with saying, the identity politics of it and sort of like the representation problems. Like the fact, like, a really important bit is like their like sort of go-to sign of like saying like, all right, we're like leaving, like no questions asked is like Malala. Like the fuck, like it's just such an like it's just pandering at that point. I feel like, and they a lot of people bought it like hook, goddamn line and sinker. But like, holy shit, don't you want like better? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe as two men, we're just like, come on, like, don't ladies. But like, I don't know. Like, I guess maybe they're grateful to have like any movie that's like pandering to them. But like, fucking a, like that doesn't mean it's a good movie.
Speaking of movies that aren't good,
Which one?
So the last list before we release you into the void is movies that capture the limits of imagination, and actually we don't only really have two movies to talk about here. But so what this list is supposed to do, and actually this list is just Marvel movies as well, but
Go figure.
but there also seems, I think this list is, I think the last list was a lot less about politics. This one kind of returns us to it a bit. But there really seems to be, in our current moment, a limit on what people think is possible. I think is what we sort of see with like Bernie Sanders' campaign. I think a lot of people discredit Bernie because they just can't imagine that his policies could get passed. And I think whether that sort of, whether this is life imitating art or art imitating life is perhaps a question we won't be able to answer, but I do think you see that limit of imagination come through in Marvel movies for sure. The first one, I guess we can start small, work our way up. Spider-Man Homecoming. I think this is a really interesting movie, particularly being about Spider-Man, who's traditionally portrayed as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and in this one somehow becomes like the mega corporation defender of the rich Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sort of really undercuts Peter Parker's like poor Brooklyn kid roots, huh? Like Tony Stark is just bankrolling him.
And it's interesting too because the movie is fully aware that it's like completely trashing the legacy of Spider-Man, but like just pretty explicitly just asks you to accept it. Like Spider-Man's like says at one point, like, aren't I supposed to be like friendly neighborhood Spider-Man or whatever? And the movie just kind of like drops, like lets that drop. Like it doesn't really.
But it's quippy.
But yeah, I mean, so I don't know. I feel like a lot of people. Again, this is one of those movies where it's like people seem to enjoy it at least as much as they enjoy any other Marvel movie. But it's really one of the more messed up Marvel movies, in my opinion, because you start off with so Vulture. I don't even remember his actual character's name, but Vulture is like legally acquires this government contract to I don't know, acquire this like alien technology. Which I'll say this too: the movie also requires you to have seen like every single other movie in the Marvel universe. So
What else is fucking new?
So I came into this movie and I had no idea what was going on. Like in the beginning scene, it's just like, oh yeah, there's just an alien ship that's crashed here, and like everyone knows about it and is cool with it. And it's like that's just how the movie starts with no explanation. I still actually don't know what movie that's from.
I think this is the immediate fallout of like the 2008 Avengers movie taking place when this is Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017. So if you can't piece those two pieces together immediately, Justin, why don't you go fuck yourself, you fucking fake fan piece of shit? Well, so what had happened in the opening scene was the initial intention was not for him to make weapons out of it. He was just there for a cleanup crew, as far as we're told, and then the government stooges of Tony Stark Incorporated or whatever the fucking comes and says no, like Mr. Stark bought out the contract, and he's like, but I already like put all this money into like the equipment and the guys. And he's like, all right, well, tough titties, and so he's left without anything. So he takes one weapon with him, and sort of that's how he makes like a living for himself. How he like survives after being told that he can go fuck himself after putting like investing all this money after his legal government contract was bought out by the richest guy in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a better summary. But yeah, so it's like, and that's the other thing too. It's like this is literally Vulture's only way of making money, whereas Tony Stark already has like all the money anyone could possibly need, and yet Spider-Man like makes it his mission to like stop Vulture, despite the fact that Vulture has literally done nothing wrong until like arguably you could say once he starts making weapons. But again, like it's not like Spider-Man's fighting on the side of the pacifist. He's fighting on the
Nope.
side of the man with a literal suit of armor that is itself a weapon, who also just makes weapons. Like that's what Stark Industries does.
Yep.
So yeah, so it really like seemed. I mean, yeah, it just like is the limit of imagination on in terms of uh being like, I guess all the Marvel movies to some extent do this, but this one really seems to just capture like the message of the movie is like the only bad thing that you can do is upset the apple cart. Like Tony Stark deserves to win because he was already winning when the movie started. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
Vulture's trying to like encroach on his territory inherently makes him the bad guy. Like there's no commentary on like what's good or bad. It's just like what's good is what is, what's bad is anything else.
And Tony Stark is never sort of challenged on his complacency with the same system, with sort of him being rich. And I mean, even this is also true sort of in Civil War, the adaptation of the comic book, where you have Captain America and Iron Man fighting each other, but like you're still supposed to like both of them because they're the two main leads of like the entire Avengers franchise. So we're just gonna have to dilute the shit out of this issue of government surveillance and just sort of make it so that like they kind of broke up, but literally it ends with if you need me, I'll be here, and everybody's still on good terms, and you're supposed to kind of still like both people. And if you don't have the right opinion or an opinion on the issue, it's okay because it doesn't matter anyways. Speaking of, it's okay if you have the wrong opinion. When faced with the issue of overpopulation over the entire universe, I guess, problem all planets seemingly have simultaneously. Justin, who are you going to call with Avengers Infinity Wars? Who's your cleanup guy?
uh yeah, so this movie is sort of the culmination of all, well, I guess Endgame is the final culmination, but it was like the fake out culmination of all of Marvel's movies up to that point. And yeah, so basically the movie is about the main villain, whose name is Thanos. Um, wants to make the universe a better place. It's a really stupid premise, but he wants to like make the universe a better place, as if the universe is like 2 or 3 planets. And his solution for this is to, well, okay, so for part one, his solution is to acquire the Infinity Stones, which give him the power to literally uh, control time and reality itself, and he can make objects appear. He can go back in time. He can do whatever he can do whatever he wants. And so, with this unlimited power, in order to solve issues of hunger and homelessness and all these other issues, he decides that he's just going to commit mass genocide on half the planet, or half the universe arbitrarily.
Obviously.
The Avengers, who are essentially the good guys, actually have no plan to make the world a better place. At no point do they deny that Thanos is correct in the sense of that there's issues in the world, but they actually never come up with a plan to make anything better. Instead, their plan is just to stop Thanos and keep everything as it is. But yeah, it's just like the fact that between the supposedly good guys and the supposedly bad guys, like neither of them ever thinks for a moment to use unlimited power to like create more homes or give people food or like give people anything that could help them. Like the supposedly lesser of two evil options, which again is like a phrase that we hear a lot in between 2016 till now. The lesser of two evil options is to just do nothing. And if that's not the perfect metaphor for where we are, I don't know what is.
And it's not even that, like, he gets all the gems off the top, and they're like, hey, shit, he's gonna do it. What are we gonna do to stop him? It's like, he has 2 hours and 40 fucking minutes of film to collect all these gems, also including all the time it took him to get the first 3, which is all the rest of the goddamn movies, and the whole time, not at any point was he like, well, maybe a complete holocaust of half of the people that exist isn't the best option. The strongest choices require the strongest of wills, so he says. But that was a really easy choice. That's the easiest answer when you could do anything is just to get rid of half the people. The fuck you talking about, dude?
He is like thinks to launch a moon at someone before he thinks to help anyone. It's just wild. But yeah, I think
he has more money, he has more power than he knows what to do with. And instead of offering all of his Thanos warehouse workers sick pay, he decides to go planetary. I don't know what that means. I don't know why I phrased it like that, but it's just food for thought.
To be fair, Jeff Bezos has not implemented that yet, but
to be fair, they have the same haircut.
Yeah, I mean, again, too, I think it really says more about the writers, or I guess I'd probably say about the Disney studio that's producing this. I mean, I'm sure, certainly if Disney wanted to find a competent writer, they could. They either are choosing to find incompetent writers or they're telling them that they need to write these scripts.
I don't know why it can't be both.
But yeah, so I mean, I think I didn't even bother to see Endgame, but I know they also didn't solve any issues in Endgame. They just defeat Thanos. But
don't worry, it's another 3 fucking hours. Best thing I did to watch that movie was play video games while I was on my iPhone. To say I technically watch it, but the movie sucks.
I think that's how you're supposed to watch the Marvel movies and the Star Wars movies too, which we didn't get a chance to get into now. But
there's always next season. To also be said, we did have Black Panther on this list. We did I mean, if you want to talk about that lightly, but we did sort of cover this, what we would talk about anyways, on one of your safe rooms about the failings of the Marvel films, which I think we also covered Spider-Man Homecoming lightly, but I'm not sure. But I mean, point still needs to be said. I don't think we had that exact same. I think we had a different lens to it the second time. I think the first time it was just like, why is Vulture the villain? And we didn't really dunk on Tony Stark that much.
Yeah, so yeah, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I got something else to say. All right, that's our season. See the show notes for links to view the artifacts for yourself. That's not true. That doesn't make any fucking sense. That's our show. Go to your local library. Donate to your local library so that you can watch the movies for yourself. Be sure to follow us, the show on Facebook and Twitter. Keep up with other episodes and articles we're reading that didn't make it to the show. That's never happened either. Artwork for the show is done by... We're not allowed to say that. Who produced the music, Justin?
Music produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Rate us 5 stars on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook and tell a friend or an enemy about the show. Join us again whenever the fuck as we find other things that we want to talk about.
We'll be back. Well, I don't think we're going to take a break, but we're just going to... The show might look a little bit different in the next episode, potentially. We're not sure yet.
Ooh, Justin, all right. As a transition to the new season, you want to play a game?
Probably not, but okay, we'll go for it.
All right. Hey,
I mean, that was the most jigsaw question.
Justin, I'm going to give you 2 quotes. And the game is it Biden or Trump?
Oh god. I think I could do good on this, but okay. Or
First,
do well on this, I should say.
there's no good to be done. First quote of 2, Trump or Biden. When talking about segregation, quote, unless we do something about this, my children are going to grow up in a jungle, the jungle being a racial jungle with tension having built so high that it is going to explode at some point.
I know that's Biden.
Correct. Democratic presidential contender, Joe Biden. Second quote, Justin, between Trump and Biden. Quote, we have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright, just as talented as white kids.
I also know that's Biden.
Correct. That quote is also Democratic Party presidential contender, Joseph Biden. Thanks for playing.
Yeah, it's funny. If Biden, well, we'll know by the time this. Well, we might not know anything by the time this comes out, but we'll probably know by the time this comes out who the Democratic nominee is. But if it is Biden, and then Joe Biden and Donald Trump debate, the funniest moment is going to be when Donald Trump calls Biden racist, and we all have to admit he's right.